Alright, there's lots of ways to roast coffee, green coffee, but I'm going to show you 3 ways today. 2 of them anybody can do. It's probably the 2 most common ways that people roast coffee at home. The first one I'm going to show you though is this Colonial roaster. It's an alcohol roaster, very rare. And I want to show you that one just because I love firing it up, and also to show you that, you know, this is the way Americans roasted coffee for the longest time, over 100 years. Then I'll move on to showing you the popcorn pumper and the heat gun method. In the last vid where I was roasting coffee, I showed you how to roast coffee over an open fire using an antique Arab coffee roaster. You can replicate that for about $15. That's what this costs. It's a fireside popcorn maker. The idea is you get your fire going, or you're camping, you stick your oil and your popcorn in there, and you can replicate that process with this. This will roast coffee well. $15. Wanted to mention that to you. Before we go any farther though, let me talk about green beans, storage, and just mention a few things to you. Coffee beans grow, they call them coffee trees, but it's more like a bush. And they grow in a berry together like that. Can you see that? Those 2 halves together? And it looks like this on the tree when they're growing. There are no machines that have ever been developed that can pick coffee beans. They have to be picked by hand. That's the only way they can get them off without damaging them. And there's 2 different ways that they process the beans before sending them out. Basically, they have to dry them out. But they're done 2 different ways. One, like these South American beans I have here, this Colombia, are washed. It's called the process of washing. And they soak the beans almost in these pools of rainwater until the berries float up and the beans drop to the bottom. And then they drain the pools and collect the coffee beans. Then they'll put the green beans out on a patio and dry them the way you see them here. On the right, and you can see there's a color difference here, these are Sumatran. And many Indonesian beans, and I'm speaking relative here, you know, I'm trying to, you know, without boring you, I'm trying to paint with broad brush here. Many of the Indonesian and African beans are dried processed. That's where they just pour all the berries out on the patio and let the sun bake the husks off them. Then they just rake the husks off or blow them off, and they collect the dried berries. There's a certain amount of moisture even after drying left in the berries, and it's best, it is said it's best to not store your beans in airtight containers, because there is a certain amount of moisture even after drying in the berry itself, the coffee bean. So it's best not to have them in a vac pack or a can for a long period of time. They store best just left out in the open, in the dark, in a dry area. The shelf life for green beans, and this is especially an attracting feature considering I'm a prepper, is the shelf life. The shelf life for green beans is over 100 years. I mean, I have heard that people have taken coffee beans out of mummies' tombs and roasted them up, and it still makes a decent cup of coffee. So it's really probably unknown how long coffee beans will last on the shelf. It's a very long time, longer than our natural lifespan. So it's a good item that you can buy ahead of time and keep. Alright, let's fire this up. This is actually of German manufacture and brought over to the States for sale. Some alcohol in there. I'll try to turn down the lights a little bit so you can see that flame, because it's actually pretty cool looking. I like to heat it up, preheat it a little bit, so I open the door and then let it sit over the flame for a little bit. Let it heat up. When you first start out roasting, especially when you first start out roasting, don't try to roast a lot of coffee. That's the #1 tip I'm going to give you. Just use a handful at a time. A handful of coffee actually turns into a lot of coffee. You'll be really surprised. Just start with a handful at a time until you get good enough. Don't waste a bunch of coffee in big batches because you don't know what you're doing yet. It takes practice. However, roasting coffee is, I mean, anybody can do it. And I'm going to give you some very short, quick tips here, at least from a beginner's course, on what to look out for and what to do. You want to think with two elements when you're roasting coffee. One is time, okay? And the other is heat. And you want to use the least amount of heat and the least amount of time to get the best batch of coffee. So heat and time, and you want to find where that crosses with the least amount of heat and time. That makes the perfect roast for full city. Okay, that's hot, preheated. I'm just going to use, maybe a half a cup, not even that, for this first batch. This opens up. It's really cool because they even put like fins in there so the beans won't styrate. If there weren't fins inside the colander, they would just line up and roll over each other, whereas the fins make them tumble. It's very important for roasting coffee. Close it up. I actually really like to roast with this because I can still listen to the roast. At first, when you begin roasting, you'll be using, your watch, you'll be using your eyes, looking at the roast to see where it is. But after a while, when you start to get good, you'll be able to smell it. You'll be able to use your sense of smell to know where the roast is, and it's a really cool thing. I don't know. That's part of what I really get into this. The intensity of the smells, what's happening in the roast at the time, and then you begin to listen because the beans will actually change the way they're hitting the sides of the colander. You can tell in the beginning when they're hard, and as time goes on, they'll sound softer. It's really a cool process. I love it. Like right now, it's been about 7 minutes, and it's just starting to pop, that first crack. And I can smell the sweet grasses. I love this. I can smell the sugar caramelizing. It's just incredible. All this going on inside that bean. You can kind of hear it popping right now. It's letting out some smoke. Sweet grass and sugar. That's what I'm smelling right now. And it's okay to look. See, I think that's done. That's about where I want. You got that second crack. Can you hear that? Dump it out. And then we want to shut it down as fast as we can. So stir it. If you don't stir it and cool it off right away, it will continue to roast inside the bean. There's a reaction, an actual reaction going on in there that will create its own heat, and it'll keep going for quite a long time. And that was probably less than 11 minutes, right around 10 to 11 minutes. And already it's, after stirring it for a little bit, it's safe to touch. And that's your product. Beautiful. And you can tell it's not over roasted because I've still got some weight to it. You can kind of tell. This is, after a while, you'll know, when you gain experience through roasting, you'll know if you've overdone it or not. This has still got some weight to it so I can burn everything off inside. You can kind of hear it, even me dropping it. And if the coffee is over roasted, it'll be real light, almost like popcorn. And here's a good example. This is where my camera fails me, I think. But, oh, there you go. You can see it. See that yellow in the middle there? Little bits of chaff left? That means I didn't over roast it. It's still got that meat in the middle. You can see the chaff in there. Another thing we're looking for is we don't want the oil breaking through the surface. That is bad. In fact, the next time you go to the store and you pick up crap coffee, if you do, and you open it up and you see the oil on the surface of the coffee, that's bad. That means it's old. And they've burnt it during the roast process, so it's lost that membrane and the oil is starting to seep out. See that? I didn't do that. It's got almost a satin finish to it. That's what you're looking for. Just like that. And the skin of the bean should be smooth. So this is what I started with. And that's what I ended up with. You see how it grew? and this is, you know, it's almost like got a rough skin to it. This grew, and it's nice and smooth now. That's what you're looking for at the end of the roast. A satin sheen to it. You don't want oil coming out. Oil comes out when it's burnt or old, or both. And then you still want some weight to it, like these have. This is actually a very nice roast, if I don't say so myself. Now I'm going to roast batch coffee on the popcorn pumper. This is a very common method for home roasting. These are very popular for home roasting as well. They're perfect. And the reason why they're perfect is because of this. See the inside there? It has those vents on the side. And it spins around, and that's what you want. You want a hot air popper that has a spinning cylinder. That's what makes these so popular. These were built in the 80s. I have the 1250 watt model. There's an 1100 out there. I would avoid that. You need the heat. Get the 1250 model if you can find one. This time I'm going to use Columbia, and again, just a half a cup. See how it's spinning? And that's what you want. If you have too much coffee in there, it won't let it spin. And if it's not spinning, the beans aren't tumbling, and it's just going to burn on one side. Now we're going to see a lot of changes as this happens. Right now, the beans aren't tumbling as much because they're the heaviest, you know, that they're going to be. So you can reach a spoon in there, put them around yourself. Already I can smell the beans starting to turn. Alright, I'm being honest here. This is the perfect way to start out. It's cheap. I mean, I think I picked this up for like $10 at a secondhand store. There's a lot of them out there. Here's the problem I have with it, because I think it's because, you know, of where I'm coming from. You hear that noise? I don't get to hear the bean. Even the smell is different because it's blowing. You know, I don't get to experience all these things that I do when I'm roasting coffee the old-fashioned way. So this isn't as popular to me, but this is by far the easiest way and the cheapest way to home roast. See, it's really starting to spin a little faster. The beans are starting to go from green to a more yellow. And basically that's all you have to do. You stir a little bit, you look in there, and after about anywhere between 10 and 15 minutes, your beans will be done. So you're roasting by sight, really, and by time. 10 to 15 minutes, your beans will be done. It's like putting cookies in the oven. See how they're starting to tumble in there now? Before they were just kind of spinning around. Now they're getting light enough to tumble. And they'll start to grow in size. This is after about 9 minutes. Okay, it's at least been a full 20 minutes. And again, going by my sense of smell, I would say that that's pretty close to being done. Look a little closer at this so you can hear me better too. Now see, again, we've got a satin shine to the outside of that bean. It's puffed up. Not as puffed up as I'd like it to be, but by the smell of it, I would say that's done. It's been a full 20 minutes. And that's, you know, kind of the cons to the popcorn pumper. Rarely will I even catch a bean popping in the popcorn pumper. So you don't get to see those types of reactions with it. And it's very dependent upon the ambient temperature of where you're using this. Like for instance, I'm out in this shed, and I would say the temperature in here is probably 50 degrees. So that's probably why it took longer than, 10 minutes. Its usual 10 minutes. If it was 70 or 80, if it's 90, it's going to take a shorter amount of time because the air comes in through here, and it's going to take longer at 50 degrees to heat it up to where you want it. So again, if I'm looking for that, if you imagine those needles again, if I'm looking for the least amount of heat and the least amount of time, this is taking longer with this. I have no way to really turn up the heat or turn down the heat. With this one, I can turn it faster, and that keeps the beans away from the fire. And with the, let's say the popcorn maker or the Arab coffee roaster, I can raise it up, obviously, out of the fire. With this one, it's just, whatever amount of time, and then by looking at it. It is very hot. And I know that's done. It's a nice looking bean. I would say it was a decent roast, but those are some of the pros and cons of it. It's very easy. If you're just starting out, this is a very easy way to roast coffee. The cons of it, well, especially for a guy like me, I don't get to go through all the steps, but it's a great way to learn, and it's a cheap way to start out. Okay, last but not least, and probably the most simplistic way to home roast coffee beans is the heat gun. I've just got a real cheap Black & Decker Heat Pro I've had here, and then I just steal one of my wife's stainless steel bowls. It's that easy. This is probably the most manly way to roast coffee beans. Again, just a half a cup. Put them in your bowl. Start your heat gun. And that's it. Toss the beans around. Again, this should only take, between 10 and 12 minutes. I do like this method because, I guess, I've got several heat guns just sitting around the garage. It's one of those items that are pretty common. Anybody can get a bowl and a heat gun. But I also like it because it's not as noisy. Again, it's important to me to hear, what the coffee's going through. And with this method, I get to go through all the stages and enjoy it. So about 4 minutes into it, I can tell the beans are starting to soften up. And I can hear the way they're striking the side of the stainless. They're losing that hardness, starting to soften up a little. Going from green to yellow. All this is taking place in that first 5 minutes. This takes a little practice, but I think it's a fun way to do it. Starting on the first crack, after about 7 minutes, you start smelling those sweet grasses. You get to go through all that. I love this part of it. I think the hardest part about roasting this way is trying to do it evenly. But with a little practice, you can get pretty good at this. This will impress the hell out of your buddies doing this in the garage. Once in a while, a bean will get caught up in the heat gun itself and burn. I should figure out a way just to put a screen around this to muzzle it and stop that. What you're hearing now is the second crack. You're getting a totally different kind of exhaust. It smells like coffee. Hear that? That's coffee. You can smell it. You can tell the way it's exhausting. Again, put it in and kill that roast. It's minutes. I've said this before. Keep this in mind. It's minutes to bring it up to that point into the second crack, and then it's just seconds. You want all those beans to turn, but as soon as they turn, you want that one moment where you dump it and shut that roast off. So I just turned these green beans into this. 3 different batches. I have the popcorn pumper, and this is probably the most even roast. You know, there's no dark and light ones that you can see together. That's because that's one of the pros of that way of roasting. It tumbles that bean constantly. But again, the cons of it is that you really don't get to go through, you know, the whole roasting process with it. It's a timed method. That one took me 20 minutes. Next time may take me 15. You just kind of, you know, you got to watch the beans. This one was the old Colonial alcohol roaster, which is a pretty good roaster. It works well. But you can even see that it's a little bit uneven. There's different colored beans in there because some get trapped a certain way, or I don't keep up a steady tumbling. But it's still a great roast. Turned out awesome. You don't see any, you know, oil sitting on the surface of these beans. And this one over here is the last one that I did with the heat gun, which is actually, you know, an excellent way to roast. That's a great roast. This is the same kind of bean. That's Colombian. And doing it with the heat gun, actually, I got a lot more. It's more smooth. The bean surface is smooth. I got a lot more size to the bean. I really developed it through the roast compared to using the popcorn pumper. So if you have a heat gun and a stainless steel bowl, you can roast at home. An old antique roaster will work. The popcorn pumper from the 80s, you know, you can pick up the secondhand store. It's that easy. And, you know, in the next vid, I'll get into different varieties of coffee. The next vid that I do about coffee. I'm so backed up with videos right now. I've got, you know, winter camping and skiing and snowmobiling, and, you know, I got this solar shack I want to show you. I picked up these great kerosene lanterns. I want to do a vid about that. I'm all over the place. That's the problem. You know, I always feel with my channel is that I don't have any I don't have any order to anything. I'm just bouncing around. I hope that's okay. Right now, I'm really excited about this coffee thing and going into this with you. So I'm going to show you. You guys that are especially buying the beans, that's what this is for. I want to show you, you know, the different ways to roast and how easy it is. So remember, you're looking at about 425 degrees in about 10 to 12 minutes. But don't get caught up in that exact timing, because roasting coffee really isn't about time. You want to shoot for that window, but what roasting coffee is all about is right here. It's what it looks like, it's what it smells like. And you'll know if you under roasted, because it won't taste right. And you'll know if you over roasted, because you'll taste that charcoal, that burnt. This is a nice full city roast. Anyway, guys, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.